Good morning, I'm Jeff Fried, and I want to thank Seth in a sort of semi-ironic way as well, because he gave me a topic which is very broad. This is everything you need to know about content analytics in 30 minutes. So it's a mega lightning talk. And then I saw last Thursday he sent to other people, don't worry about talking about technology basics because Jeff's going to cover it. So I'm going to do a whirlwind tour. And because we're all in this room with, I think, a shared vision of an information experience at your fingertips and a choreography of information, I ripped this off from where did I rip this off from? Yes. But one of my favorite pictures, this is really what I think many of us have as a shared vision, and we're trying to build systems, build solutions, build businesses that fit into this general vision. And I see three main slices of this as views, and I'll be trying to talk about the business innovator part of it. But mostly I'm going to start talking about what is smart content from the end user perspective, about having fun, about finding answers. And because I'm a nerd, and a software engineer, a guy that started really in algorithms, I'll then go into that and give you a sense of the technology in very limited time. I got into this area in about 12 years ago by being pulled into a semantic search startup called Lingo Motors, and ran development there, and I've been hooked ever since. For the last 5 years I've been at Fast and then Microsoft. So the examples I'm going to be using are largely from Bing, Microsoft. I ran search for SharePoint 2010, so I've also had the good fortune to co-author 2 books that came out this year. Shameless promotion there. This is, if you are an insomniac, this is definitely recommended reading. But I'll take examples from that. You can only blame me for my opinions, though. Don't go back to Microsoft, especially since I left there 2 weeks ago. And I'm going to start really by some things that we all know, which is that the amount of content and the types of content and the rate of content is exploding. Like 10 years ago, we talked about content doubling every 3 years. 5 years ago, it was doubling every 2 years. A couple years ago, I heard somebody saying it was doubling every 18 months and beating Moore's law, and I bet it's faster than that now. So it's not just exponential, it's hyper-exponential. And this quote comes from one of the interviews Seth did on his blog, which is, information is out there. If you think the information doesn't exist, you're not looking hard enough. As a search nerd, this is a findability problem. You shouldn't have to look hard. But the point is that the information really is out there. And this explosion is something that changes everything. So we are entering a new era that is fundamentally different because of the nature of content and the explosion of content. You see this in online business. You see companies that didn't exist 5 years ago achieving very large size. You see a lot of folks in this room adding value onto content platforms that are run on cloud platforms that are powered by ad platforms as their main business model. And this is a very, very vital, exciting new ecosystem that didn't exist at all 10 years ago and barely made money 5 years ago. So the mashups and the emerging ecosystems provided by smart content are a very tangible example that we live with. This is also happening inside the enterprise, if you will, as we think about the kind of content we keep and what a data warehouse, if you will, is. I spent about 3 years working on something called the Adaptive Information Warehouse at FAST. And the thesis there was that information of all types, doesn't matter if it's structured, semi-structured, unstructured, it's all of them you. If you're familiar with Mark Beyer, he's a great analyst from Gartner, you've seen this picture, which is that as you get towards more and more interesting questions and more interesting problems, trend analysis, compliance, intelligence, things that are looking for insight, rather than things that are creating cubes on a nightly basis. The more you get towards the right side of the chart, the more that the unstructured, messy kind of content we all live with matters. And that brings us really into our job in this room, which is not just to flatten the haystack faster or sift through it, but to grow the needle through the kind of techniques of aggregation, text analytics, content analytics, and providing things that are findable, that are relevant, that are meaningful, that are actionable. So that's really, to me, what our joint mission is to grow that needle. So let's take a look at what is smart content from the end user perspective. And I'll say things that are, I hope, obvious to everyone here, since pretty much everybody's in this business, but maybe some insights as we get into millennials and what my kids are teaching me. First of all, smart content is streaming. I mean, multimedia is really everywhere in a very tangible way. And I'll pick on systems that I personally have helped build over the last 2 years. I have Search on the Brain. I also have SharePoint in my shorts. So it's, that's really the milieu I've been working in. Boston University uses a very successful portal for education, for courseware, for special events, for special speakers, and it is a fabulous way for people to not have to get out of bed in the morning and go to class. But it's been a very successful platform, and I see this over and over in education and training and in things like that of using multimedia content. The Washington State Digital Archives has more multimedia content than traditional books and literature. And pretty much the only thing that I've built recently that my kids use is Hulu. How many people here use Hulu? Great. So, of course, multimedia is in entertainment, but it's no longer a when is this coming. It's everywhere, and it's a big part of it. But it's not just consuming this information, it's also producing it. Who here has used the Cisco Show and Share? Okay. One of my favorite, even though this was a competitor from a Microsoft perspective, I think it's a great system that takes the idea that you're creating content anytime you're talking with people or anytime you're on a conference call and make that easy to publish, easy to share, easy to mark up. So that now it's not just about consuming this multimedia information, it's about producing it and producing it in an interesting cycle on an easy basis. FAST was the leader of a audio-visual search research project called Pharos. It's about a 30 million euro project. It finished on New Year's Eve this past year and is now in commercialization phase. And one of the things that taught me in particular is how rich the ecosystem of technology around multimedia is. This is a flow. It's a little hard to read, but just impressionistically, these building blocks are a flow of taking video and applying face recognition, scene recognition, object recognition, and using that then to make things annotated, accessible, findable, and archived by composing these building blocks together. So this stuff is really here today and is very, very powerful, and it's because smart content is multimedia. And of course, smart content is also mobile, and that's a truism, as John had said, that gestures and carrying around our content is the way we all live now. My 10-year-old is more tuned into what's happening in my community than I am. He's watching our local elections and actually asked me to build something to predict the effect of the elections on his cafeteria lunch menu because the schools are underfunded. That's a smart content application. But the thing that interests me personally is location, because as my real estate agent taught me, it's all about location, location, location. Not just in mobile form. I mean, this is a Know Your Customer application built by a Microsoft partner called Cosini in the UK. one thing this taught me is how much geotagging is here. It was very hard to find photos that weren't already geotagged. News came in geotagged. The customer records came in geotagged. And geography in this application, which went live about 6 months ago, was essentially the primary axis on which people explored information. So location, location, location. Also in mobile. This is an application, if you go to Bing Twitter and Bing Twitter Maps, you can use this now, which is a way, it's just started as a fun thing, is a group called FUSE, which stands for Future Social Environments. And they took entity extraction technology from FAST, applied it to Twitter feeds, then applied geotagging on both the content and the knowledge of where you were to do things like this. Hey, raw ham, can you bring me a burrito? This understands that you might be looking for a burrito shop on 405 on your way to the office, or something that is related to burrito, like some other fast food restaurant. Cool application and very much mobile. My 12-year-old niece, Louisa, is basically addicted to her device, not only texting under the dinner table, but also watching, what is it, America's Best Model? It's very insipid, America's Top Model, excuse me. I can barely watch this. On her device all the time in a social fashion. So this is actually not a picture of her, but it might as well be, because I see these kids just sharing, swapping devices in a very mobile, fluid way. And that really brings us into smart content being social. It's streaming, it's mobile, it's social. And whether you believe in the wisdom of crowds or the stupidity of crowds, the power of crowds is indisputable. So there's lots of different layers. We could have a whole conference, and I'm sure there are lots of things in Seth's mind to have another conference on social media analytics, but I only have 30 minutes. And I'll show you some cool stuff. This is a project, not public, but you can go to the Microsoft research page and look at the technology that takes the same marked up Twitter feeds that I mentioned and does visualization on them. The upper right and middle bottom use a visualization toolkit called Pivot, which you can use, which is a pretty powerful, cool visualization toolkit. And you can see in Twitter the spread of a trend. You can see retweets. You can tell by who tweeted them and where they tweeted them how ideas are spreading. You can see in a conference how participation is going and watch ideas float around in that way. So the content here is both the ideas themselves and the social participants and the way they interact with each other. There's a trend, if you will, a trade-off between data visualization and data mining. In fact, a lot of the journals now try to have a sexy, visualization and mining, combine them together. And this is much more on the visualization end. If you put people in the loop, you can get better insight than deep, deep, deep grinding on similar data. Using this, and this actually came from the Bing group, looking at what are the patterns of questions people are asking Bing. And they boiled down to basically 4 things. Looking for relevant documents, so that's bread and butter, traditional IR, looking for compliance, looking for Java, and using disambiguation, using the traditional techniques to find answers for that and involve people in a bit of a dialogue. The second category was social media content. What is happening, what should I do while I'm in New York? Where are my friends? And that is happening a lot actually on Bing Twitter now. The third is trends and group insight, looking at community knowledge and seeing how things are going. Why, how does adoption work? I happen to have an adopted daughter, and the adoptive community, for me, is a source of great wisdom. And it's not a particular individual, it's the community as an entity. And then the fourth pattern, which was one that is particularly interesting to me, was about answers. I love this Facebook update. Anybody give their babies baby Benadryl for travel, jet lag? I want to hear from parents whether they have or not, or how it went. And it's really looking for somebody to talk to, as well as answers. So if you look across the breadth of publication and the breadth of access, there's a spot in the middle here that I've labeled answers that I think is ripe for us as a group to hone in on and get better at. And there's definitely startups in this area, and I think there's some talks and lightning talks also in this area. But the breadth of publication of Twitter is only one of the publication methods, and we're applying the same things that I showed with Twitter Viz are also being applied to Facebook and email traffic, which brings us into this issue of permission, security, privacy, and those trade-offs. So there's a big challenge with this in this kind of technology. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying that it's an important thing to remember as you're building solutions, the privacy and opt-in trade-offs that come from social interactions. The social interactions here, I'm showing a natural community and a spam campaign. Spam campaigns here, this is mapping email traffic and who you're emailing back and forth to, are highly visible there, and that's a good way to really see what's going on. This information is useful both directly, but also in terms of making systems better. With SharePoint 2010 and a product called Fast Search for SharePoint that we released, we use this a lot to make search better. Simple things like tagging and recommendations of content, but also tracking click-through rates and connections. Answers that come up from people that you're connected to are, they come up higher in relevance ranking than people that are 3 degrees difference. That same idea, and that, by the way, has been a very, very popular, very well adopted. That same idea has been taken a little bit further by a group called Office Labs with a social intranet search relevance project. SCISR, there's only 26 to the fourth four-letter acronyms, and SCISR also is a semantic speech recognition standard by W3C, so I get confused. But basically the idea is to take these social graphs and what you're looking for, what you're searching for, who you're interacting with, and use it to make search better. And my new company, I've been there 2 weeks now, called BA Insight, does this in a way that goes into business data. So it's not just who you're working with in business, but how are you consuming this content? What have you actually read in a big document? And when you assemble information together into a research report out of your search results, who do you send it to? And using that information to make relevance better. So social behavior can make information finding better. And we know this because of recommendation. I mean, if nothing else, the Netflix contest showed us both how interesting the problems of recommendations are, how much creativity there still is to be had, and how much value that brings to business innovation. So we're typically well above collaborative filtering and into some level of personalization, but there's a long way to go in recommendations. Okay, so I've talked about what is smart content, that it's social, that it's mobile, that it's streaming. Let me get a little bit into what we can do in terms of trends and algorithmics. And I'm going to start with what I call virtuous cycles. Anybody heard of this term before? Okay, good. So it's really about creating the opposite of a vicious cycle, where you're spiraling downward, is a virtuous cycle, where you're spiraling upward. And the idea here is that I see a lot of patterns we can do with smart content. That, for example, the consumption, creation, connection cycle is one that is incredibly powerful. The easier it is to find information and consume it, and then retweet, repost, reanalyze, it makes authoring simpler and participation in community simpler, and that provides more value in the data you've combined. And this is a primary virtuous cycle, I think, when it comes to content and content analytics. I see this happening. Has anyone here played World of Warcraft? Okay. So this is an example of why World of Warcraft is so addictive. Because the more people use it, the better it gets. We see this in business. That, I don't know, when did the long tail paradigm come into our jargon? Maybe 8 years ago? It's still going very strong. And the long tail is growing much, much faster than the primary query engines and generating a lot more value. So there's a virtuous cycle there. There's also a virtuous cycle in systems themselves. And again, I'm going back to SharePoint and the stuff that I've just built, where taking social behavior into better relevance, which I talked about a little bit ago, also makes refinement or conversational or dialogue or more like this, whatever you want to call the pearl growing exploration patterns, better. And that makes social behavior better. So there's a virtuous cycle at this level as well within a system. One of my favorite examples of this is a training portal. This is built on Fast Search for SharePoint, where there's a couple of nice tricks. It takes you through from PowerPoint to recordings of people talking, like we might have if you watch these, the recordings from this session, and click on one and go to the other, and it self-synchronizes so you can fast forward through boring talk like mine and go on to the next one directly in PowerPoint. But it also uses consumption of these lessons to build you a personal lesson plan, and uses some information of what else you've consumed, what people like you have consumed, so that the curriculum, as people learn more and more in nuggets and not in days in the classroom, as our attention spans get more and more ADD. So this is personalized learning plan built upon this idea of taking social information and using that for recommendations and using that for better answers. One thing I maybe it's a pet peeve, but something I'd like our community or our industry, at least as vendors, to do more of is setting realistic expectations, because text analytics, content analytics isn't imperfect. It's limited technology. And I often run into this SpongeBob syndrome. Gee, Patrick, everything's wonderful. And analytics is fabulous, and it will solve the holy grail. And semantics, which get four semanticists in a room and they can't agree on the word semantics and what it means, sort of ironic, is a big thing about that. And machine learning is you see wave after wave of startups coming out of universities where there's still hundreds of PhDs per year in this area, coming out with the fact that this technology solves everything, which it does not. And I think when we get people talking about what it does and not how it works, we'll have, and use the people in the loop, we'll have short-circuited the overhype syndrome. The technology that we're working with is imperfect. Right? My wife, who's a black and white thinker, just basically calls it broken. Yet we can do very powerful things with it. So why is it imperfect? Well, first, we're dealing with human language, which is difficult, ambiguous, often contradictory, and error-prone. Secondly, we're dealing with people who make mistakes. I mean, a friend of mine always tells me, all data is dirty. If there's information of any type, it's dirty. Thirdly, we're often dealing with systems or machines that create, sometimes by design, sometimes just by mistake, incorrect information that's hard to clean up. Like this example of misspelling school. Take a little while to clean that up. The technology we're working with is really a grab bag. To me, there's a variety of very similar things. Sentiment analysis can be built through specialized classifiers. But they're very similar in the clay, but they're very different in terms of components and solutions. And depending upon the problem you're trying to solve, you might want to use different components. again, each of these components fit into an even more complex landscape of things that are more deterministic, less fuzzy, if you will, but part of the solutions that people use in this general area. And they're often built from a composition of subcomponents themselves. I mean, this is fairly straightforward. 20 years ago, there were pitched battles between the linguistic camp and the statistic camp in natural language processing. Now there's no purism left on the planet. Everything is a combination of what I call statistics, linguistics, and gymnastics, where gymnastics is system integration. And because these things compose, error rates propagate. You can have a tokenizer that's 99.7% accurate, which sounds awfully good until you realize that's a 0.3% error rate. And that will feed into a tagger, which inherits that error rate and comes out with something which is 97% accurate, 3% error rate, which feeds then into entity extraction. So this technology is just never going to be perfect. But much like speech recognition is never perfect, it can still be very, very valuable. Giving a sense of the way this composition works, taking entity extraction, whether typically is noun phrase extraction, and building facts out of it in order to get a triple that gold is found in this location, you have to have the bases solid. And when you build upon this further, I stole this courtesy of David at Linguimatics, you can build some very, very powerful visualization and analysis techniques. Just don't expect them to be 100.0%. The same thing I showed you in the Pharos project is now commercially available. In August, Microsoft released a content transformation studio that's designed to really be a developer tool and build sort of these content analytics applications the way that people in the structured data world use ETL tools. And examples of things that you can build with that are classic things like advertising effectiveness, brand monitoring. There's a system called Looking Glass from Microsoft that's been in trial for about 9 months with 100 customers, taking social media, mining that, and providing analysis in sort of the brand space. It's mostly working with ad agencies and their clients today. So I have like 4 minutes left and still too many things to say. I'll speed through a bit and leave hopefully a little bit time for questions. Okay. First of all, I mentioned that semantics means many things. It's a bit of a Rorschach test. And if you're familiar with Hal of the Open the Pod Bay Doors Dave fame, that holy grail is still out there when people talk about semantics. And we're, 12 years after Tim Berners-Lee's Scientific American article about the semantic web? The holy grail is not progressing, but pragmatic applications of semantic technology are. And it's very clear that relationships give you better answers. You take this example of take an article, try to find out an ad that might fit that article. If you just do word spotting, you'll get a Ginsu knife ad, because it's clearly about knives. But if you do a little bit smarter, this is not even rocket science, to do relationships and look at that, you can really recommend stuff in criminal justice, because this is about crime. So semantics matters. You can't work with just syntax. And semantic matters in a large sense. So machine learning is extremely powerful. I won't talk too much about this except to say that my favorite systems here all have some boosting or semi-supervised technique. I built a system that did conversational things by recording call center conversations and then using that to train a machine. And the people in the loop was the biggest factor, no matter what the algorithm for machine learning was. It's still a very ripe area, and the holy grail of semantics is there's new stuff every year. This is just to give you impressionistically, often highly mathematical, sometimes practical, sometimes not. Still a lot of innovation to go in the semantic space. And still a lot of old chestnuts. Psych, which was started by Doug Lenat in 1984, is still going quite strong, actually commercialized in PsyCorp, and is useful in its way, but is very difficult when it comes to any particular domain. So if you build an application, this is an application built with document analytics and semantic aggregation in the movie domain, because movie data is very easy to get, and it's quite rich. The domain matters. The more specific the domain, the more effective the system. And that brings us into context, because this is about getting intent, matching intent to content in context. And to me, the biggest weapon against information overload is context. What matters? In a very prosaic sense, this is another big feature in SharePoint 2010 and Fast Search for SharePoint. The simple trick of making it easy to administer who you are, where you are, what you're working on, and have it be a byproduct of what you're doing every day rather than a profile you have to set. It's a big win in terms of audience-specific information. Same thing applies. This is a system built with Dow Jones for Client Radar, where the context is the client as well as the advisor as well as the market conditions. And the market conditions, of course, get us into, I will never use the word real-time and search in the same breath, although I'm being proven wrong, because I'm an old-fashioned guy. Real-time means milliseconds to me. The context is also time. So the old adage, time is money, has new play in our arena. And there's a new offering also from Microsoft in this area called Stream Insight. It's complex event processing that came out this summer. Worth looking at if you don't already know about it. So let me try to wrap up and leave room for the lightning talks with a couple of just observations. First, that the distinctions that some of us make between data and metadata are gone. Data is metadata, and treating them differently is soon going to go away. Same thing with content and connections. So bridging between information is itself information, and the content analytics as glue is very powerful. Secondly, smart content needs gardeners. People in the loop is very powerful, and curation, which seems to be somehow a new word, is extremely powerful, because these kind of systems that talk about creating knowledge benefit from a little help from their friends at every step. And of course, people are in the knowledge consumption and the milieu of using it together. So use gardeners. And that is what will get us to really interesting new business innovations, if you will. So let me just summarize. First of all, smart content. These may be motherhood, but they're quite real. It's social, mobile, streaming, and exploding. And content analytics needs gardeners, it needs context, it needs virtuous cycles, and there is lots of exciting, interesting technology that's changing constantly. Just remember that it's imperfect and embrace that. A quick ad from my sponsor, which is that I am now 2 weeks into a new gig. BA Insight is a company that makes search connectors, query-side analytics, and is going up the stack in terms of building applications and content analytics. So thanks very much. A little bit over time. Okay. Any questions? No questions. Okay. Too fast.
I think the second thing is, or the second analogy is the buzzwords of ontology and things like that, that if you go back 20 years ago, relational, or 30 years ago, relational databases are coming around. Now you jump to now, you can talk to anybody in an organization and they can think about, is this a good use case for a relational database? You understand the requirements. Now what's happening is too many people are saying, let's build an ontology. Let's add semantics. What does that mean? And I think people are skipping the step of what's the fundamental problem that they're trying to solve. And if we can get to that point, then the answer of what does semantics mean to you or to me or to her kind of answers itself. And if we can get to the point of removing the buzzwords of ontology so that in 10 years from now, it's just like a relational database, people can understand what that really means, that's going to help us quite a bit. It's coming back to the fundamentals of what are the requirements we're trying to solve.
Okay. So I totally agree with that observation. I served on the OWL committee for a year, about a decade ago, I should say. I did time on the OWL committee. And I don't think we should throw away these terms, ontology, taxonomy. We need to have labels for them. We just need to focus on what the problems are. Maybe one more question, because we have a break after this, which is really where the action happens, you know. Yes?
An article in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago about companies that are providing these listening services, mining social media, and one of them involved actually mining a site where people were talking about problems they had, you know, regarding mental health issues and stuff like that. So just a question, do we need to establish policies in terms of mining social media, and do you think there's going to be a backlash against this like there was against data mining?
That's a very good question. I don't have a strong opinion. Well, I do have a strong opinion. It just is not worth very much. Because I'm definitely not an expert in this area. I think policies are going to be useless because they'll happen way too late. And what will either emerge is the kind of social etiquette that people have developed independent of policy on Facebook or on email, or the kind of backlash that you found against privacy and data mining and Big Brother. I don't know which way it'll go.
Thank you, Jeff.